Okay, recording is in process. Okay, once again, good morning, everyone. And today's webinar is about Introduction to Financial Intelligence. And today's presenter is Nav Benar, and he's the Principal Consultant at Infozone. And I'm today's host, Shima Ozins. That being said, I will pass over to you, Nav.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Nav Benar. I'm a Principal Consultant at Infozone. And today we're going to discuss strategic financial intelligence. And the question is, what really is it? And the main points of today's webinar is going to be the concept of strategic financial intelligence, the external systems and report libraries, dynamic dashboards and analysis. Then we're going to go in an example of Qlik view in a financial reports and analysis application, and we'll touch down on the Qlik Sense app in sales analysis. So the question is, what is strategic financial intelligence? And it's an old term, or the older term was business intelligence, but it got a little bit hijacked by everything is now business intelligence. So it's just to pull back and focus on a specific part of what is known as data analysis today. So maybe just to give some context, we are living in a Google age where every answer raises a new set of questions. And in the words of Peter Drucker, we're living in an age where there are accelerating change, increasing complexity, and an ever-multitude competition. So this is the reality of today's life. And what we have to work with is a staggering amount of ever-increasing data. And then what we have to realize is all data and information are not equal. So the first thing I want to touch on is the Pareto principle, that most probably 80% of the value will come from 20% of your data. So just think about that for a moment. And then second to the Pareto is actually a better example. It's called the price law, that says 50% of the value will come from the square root of the sum or of the total. And what it means is that if you've got 10,000 terabytes of data, and this is now in the world of big data, 50% of the value will come from less than 100 terabytes, meaning that as the data grow, the significant part of that data, or the part that really counts, becomes smaller and smaller. So the question then is, what is the most important data in a company? So in a world of big data, you'll have to start to prioritize things. And what we think it is, and if we look at business intelligence or strategic financial intelligence, is that the data that feeds or touch into the following domains are really the things that you should pay attention to, meaning that they should carry a higher weight in terms of things. So what are these domains? The first one is the profit and loss statement. So that is, at the end of the day, the thing that counts almost the most. Then second to that is the balance sheet. The third domain is cash flow, human resources intelligence, the company's strategic KPIs, and operational KPIs. In our estimation, the data that's in these domains and the data that touch and feed into these domains are more important than anything else in your company. And so that earns a special place then in terms of business intelligence. So we created a set of applications in Qlik View and Qlik Sense that really focus on this. And we call it strategic financial intelligence applications. And what you'll see, there are really 3 streams with 2 pieces on the edges. The first one is cash flow, that looks at accounts payable, your cash, or what is in the bank, and accounts receivable. That links up with human capital, your HR and payroll. And then in the center, you'll have things like expense analysis, true financial analysis, sales and income, and then CRM and pipeline. And then the supply chain applications are procurement, materials management, order fulfillment, and sales forecast. And at the bottom, you'll find manufacturing. So we've built what we call a Tier 1 framework solution. And what it means is, this is in the Qlik View, how a typical solution would look like. In other words, you'll pull in from ERP and other data sources, you'll have extracted QVDs, you'll have transformed QVDs, and then you'll build the application. But in order to sort of build higher density applications that stack higher, that's more scalable, we created a systems library set, and that looks, the first one is a pure systems library that focuses on measures, dimensions, and variables. It's pulled that together. We've got a report library, then a financial report library that's the definition of financial reports, a knowledge library, and a user access library. And the way we use it, we stack it, so Qlik View is sandwiched then between, we put these in a metadata layer below the application, so it's behind, it's part of the data model, and then that is linked with a set of object library of dashboard components, analysis components, and report components that makes these framework solutions extremely adjustable, so we can bring in almost any data in it and tailor it for the client's needs. So just to give you an idea, this is the application I'll touch on. In this type of application, this is a financial application, there are really 3 dynamic components or pivotal points. And the first one is the measures. So in this case, we've got gross profit, headcount, net income and loss, sales, things like those. So the idea is that that information will come from the systems library, and we are able then to add measures or take measures away through different sprints of the application. The second component is comparatives. So we can start off with a budget and previous year, but we can expand that without changing anything on this application and just adding it in the systems library. So we'll have budget previous year, but we can add then adjusted budget or a forecast and things like that. And then the third piece are dimensions. We can start off with 5 dimensions and expand it to 68 dimensions if we want to. And that gives us the possibility of really millions of possible views of even a single screen. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over and just give you an idea of something like the systems library. And what you'll find in it is every measure is defined in there. So we can end up with, 300 measures in application. We also have dimensions, very specific dimensions in the application, and a few other things. The second piece that I want to touch on is the financial report library. So financial reports are not well, or Qlik View is not well adjusted to deal with financial reports. So what we've done is we created a financial report, a financial report writer that can deal with that complexity. So basically you're looking at, this is our financial report, these are the lines, and what we want to bring in is on that line, we want to bring in sales, whiskey, and bourbon, and it must touch down on that specific account and that sub-account. And we can define it, and then all of these must roll up into the total there. So that total is really picking up those indexes. And that way we can write extremely complex financial reports in Qlik View or for Qlik View. And what I'm going to do now is to go into Qlik View, and this is the Qlik View side of it. So we're on profit and loss analysis, and what you'll see here is really that very same report that's now, and what we're looking at is the actual against the budget, and it goes through, sorry, let me just clear that. And it gives you a detailed financial statement. That's better. So it goes into expenses and it creates subtotals, and the subtotals are all worked into something like the net profit. So if you can bring this information into Qlik View, and these, what we call these are like cornerstone applications. They are the big applications for that C-level management and everybody below them use. And if you can bring in the financial information, you're in a very well position to look at other information, and I'll touch on that now. So this is a financial, this is a profit and loss, and then in this case what we're doing is, and we can start basically on a location, and that's our 4 locations. We bring in total income, gross profit, direct expenses, operating profit, and then I can go, let's say, to Rochester and say I want to see the regions underneath that, and or the item groups underneath that, and it gives me the sort of the breakdown of from total income to gross profit, direct expenses, right down to net profit, basically what you see there. The second piece would be something like the balance sheet. This information, this is a pretty simple balance sheet, but once you bring in this information, you're really at the apex of what we call true business intelligence or strategic financial intelligence, because once you've done that, you can look at it. Let me click on that. So now we brought in other measures, things like headcount that comes into play. So we overlaid the financial information with something like headcount, and we can bring in, we can calculate sales by headcount, and we can bring in like floor space if we want to. But these are sort of key measures or key performance indicators, and we're looking at it at the moment actual against previous year, and we see we're doing pretty well against the previous year, and this is how we track over time. The gray bars are where we're below previous year, and once again below this we're looking at year-to-date and month-to-date numbers. So year-to-date will be the year of 2014, and this would be the month-to-date, with other words, December, the last month selected by item group. But we can also look at it, for instance, by location and see how our 4 locations are doing on, and then you can sort of drill down into something like New York to see how they are doing. And in this same way, we focus at the moment, these are on gross profit, so we can say we want to look at sales. So this is now the sales for the year over time. This is the sales year-to-date and month-to-date, and this is the sales, and these are all compared to the previous year, and we're doing good against previous year. But what we can do is, what I mentioned is, the comparative is one of the dynamic points, and what we can do is now to change it from previous year to something like budget, and then we see we're not doing that well against budget. In fact, on sales we're far below. We can click back to something like gross profit and see how we're doing. So we're doing a little bit better on gross profit, and we can even go to net income and loss and see how we're doing there. So there are a few other ways we can look at this by numbers. We can change that to a bar chart. That's gross profit. And then this chart is pretty nice because it brings up the differences between the actual numbers and budgets and bring the biggest outliers to the top. And we can see New York is doing well, but everybody else is doing poorly. And then one of the last things in this application is we can go into something like the DuPont analysis. This is true ratio analysis, and because we've got all the information correctly categorized, we can look at things like sales and cost of sales, how that relate to gross profit. If you take off your operating expenses, that will come into total expenses, and you'll get to something like return on sales. And then from the balance sheet side, there's another set of numbers that will roll up in asset turnover, and that will provide you with return on investment. So what you can do now is to say, I want to look at this for a specific location, or so I can go to location and say, I want to look at the return on investment for New York, or New York and Long Island. So this is really the power of bringing in or using a framework and something like the financial report library to be able to pull these numbers together. The last piece I want to show you is something like profit and loss over 12 periods, and you'll see that same structure, and we can have many of these structures, define them. Let me just close the locations, and then I can also add something like, so these are the total numbers, and that's the 13th, what we call the 13th period. So it's December to January, and then we can see that month. If we want to look at that profit and loss statement by location, that will give us the exact same vertical definition, but just across my 4 different locations. And then I'm going to jump over to Qlik Sense, and we're going to look at a very similar but a sales application. So the idea of dynamic analysis is to look at, once again, what you have is the comparative forecast against the previous year. We focus on sales, so these are all the different key performance indicators. In this case, it's sales, units, average sales value, gross profit, volume, average volume cost. This data is of a liquor distributing company, and we can see at the moment how our sales track over time. And then on this lower level, you look at dimension. So you look at sales numbers, actual sales against previous year, and this is actual sales for the month to date against previous year. And once again, you can switch it against the forecast. So the sales will go against the forecast, and you get a sort of a different picture. But in this case, we're going down to item level, but we can go back and say we want to look at item category level. So now this is by item category, meaning that this is my whiskeys. So the red is the previous year, in this case it's the forecast, and then against actuals. And I can see that. And then what I can do is, for instance, to focus on whiskeys and bourbons, and then go down to, say, my customer groups and say, who are the customer groups that looks at or buys that product from us? So these two share the same dimensions. So this is the graphical representation, and this is the numeric representation of that. And once again, I can switch back to something like previous year and then focus on gross profit. So those are all my measures I've got at the moment 2 comparators, and what we can do, if we add into the systems library something like adjusted forecast or a budget, that information will come in here without us changing anything on this front end. Let me just walk you through a couple of more examples of dynamic analysis. So the second piece is, let's stay on sales, and what we want to do is we want to look at sales at customer group, item group, location, and let's say salesperson. And then if you want to focus on New York, that picture will sort of emerge out of that. So this way you can look at 4 different dimensions, in this case in one measure. If I switch this over, so you can also look at it by numbers. So we're looking at those 4 dimensions. We're looking at sales. We can switch that to, say, gross profit. And then, so this is like a pivot table that's disassembled, and you can see it in its totality, meaning that you can start now at any point and say, Brian Wallace, what is he selling? The moment you focus on him, you'll see he only sells in New York, Long Island. He only sells to liquor stores, and that is the item categories that he's selling to. Or you can start from Canadian whiskies and say, what is Canadian whiskies doing? So that's how it sells through liquor stores. That's by location, and that's by salesperson. And what is quite nice with the new version of Qlik is you can go into, you can look at this data in a graphical format, and once again you've got all the handles to change it. One more thing that I want to show you before we go to questions is dynamic reporting in Qlik Sense. And let me start on a clean slate here, and you'll see. So we can start with sales by location. So that's my sales by location. And then you can add, these are all the dimensions available for this report. And they are defined, as I said, in the systems library. And you can bring them in into this report then. Then I can say I also want to see gross profit and gross profit percentage, but I want to see my customer group. And the moment I select customer group, what you'll see happen here is that it expand this chart now. And I can say I also want to bring in my item group or item category, and that will fill in here. And suddenly the 4-line report now becomes maybe 4,000 lines. And then in the report, you can say, let's just focus on liquor stores in the New York area, and that's then a list of my liquor stores. And this gave me the ability to really pull in, and it's creating, so the end user is creating its own report. Instead of creating 50 different reports with different combinations of dimensions and measures, we build it all on a single screen and make it available for the end user to use. I'm going to stop here and let me know if there's any comments or questions at this point.
Okay, thank you, Nav. So I'm going to take it over. And I'd like to open up for the Q&A session. So please type in your questions in the Q&A panel. And while you're typing your questions, I will show you where you can watch the recordings from the webinars that we've done in the past. If you go to the zone infozoneus.com, you can go to the knowledge base section where you can check for video, and that's how you can find the webinar recordings from the past. So please check it out. So that being said, I will open up for the Q&A. The first question is, okay, so I think this is related to Qlik Sense. How many extensions are you using in your application? Maybe you can share your screen too one more time. So I will pass you the ball.
So at the moment, the only extension objects we're using in this application is this dynamic report and these calendar items. And we use, so it's the minimum of extensions that we use in this application. These are select only or select one extensions. But apart from that, most of what you see is standard Qlik Sense.
Okay, and then I don't know if the internet connection is going wacky or a lot of things are flickering. But for the cycle groups that I think you showed in the bottom charts, are they something you are using as an extension, or it's kind of a calculations? Because I believe Qlik Sense doesn't have the cycle group yet.
Is that in Qlik Sense or Qlik View? Sorry.
Qlik Sense.
You're talking about these ones, or?
Yeah, so the dimension, you pick one of the dimensions, and then in the previous screen, I suppose, the bar chart was changing and the table was changing. So you're assigning the field into the charts. Is that how you're doing? You're kind of looking at the field and changing the dimension?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So it's not because there's no cycle group in Qlik Sense.
That's correct. So we're changing the dimension in the chart itself. So okay. It's mimicking the idea of a cycle group.
Okay. Another question that I'm seeing here is where you structure the profit and loss statements in the Excel sheet, how long does it take to configure everything?
The profit and loss, it depends on the company and how their general ledger has been set up. So if I go to the report library, so what we can do in the report writer, we can use up to 5 different segments, and we define each one of these. So this might be normally it's the account segments. This might be division or department segment, and we can use 2 others. And we typically work in ranges of accounts, and if so, just a little bit about the syntax here is that's for account 1,100, and it's from that second segment from 400 to 460. And if the accounts are properly structured in the ranges in the general ledger, this is very easy. If it's come over a long time and there was different people involved and the accounts is all over the place, this takes a little bit longer to be able to sort of pinpoint specific accounts. And then, but the idea is we use, once you define something like this structure, you can use it in other reports. So you'll see there's a range of reports here, and some of them basically use this specific T101 as a template then. So the idea is that you only define it once, and then you can reuse it in other reports.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so thank you very much, Nav, for today's webinar. I believe everybody's informed about your financial intelligence applications. So thank you, and we're officially closing this session. Thank you.